Welcome back. Hey, my dear friends. You could go through your entire life believing you were clean while never truly washing your body at all. Everything around you would seem controlled, your clothes neat, your movements composed, and no one would question it. But beneath those layers, a completely different reality quietly builds, one that no one sees and no one talks about. The deeper you look, the harder it becomes to separate what feels normal from what actually is. Tonight, step inside a world where cleanliness was not what it seemed and discover what people never realized about their own bodies. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soothing background. And let's embark on this journey together. Ether tonight. If you were born into a medieval town, washing your entire body would not be something you did again and again, but something you might experience only a few times across long stretches of your life. It would not sit quietly inside your routine. It would stand apart from it, distant and infrequent, reserved for moments that felt important enough to justify the effort, the time, and the risk that many believed came with it. For most women, bathing was tied to occasions rather than habits. A festival, a wedding, or a rare moment of preparation for something significant could prompt it. Outside of these events, there was little reason to consider it. Days passed, then weeks, and eventually longer periods, all without the body being fully washed. Over time, this absence did not feel unusual. It became the quiet structure of daily life. There was no constant reminder pushing toward cleanliness as we understand it today. No daily expectation, no social pressure demanding that the body be regularly cleaned. Instead, the expectation rested on appearance and behavior. As long as a woman looked composed and her clothing appeared in order, nothing else needed to be questioned. The body itself remained out of sight and therefore out of concern. Water, which might seem like the obvious solution, was not always seen as safe. There were lingering beliefs that it could weaken the body if used too often. Some thought that opening the pores made it easier for illness to enter. In a world where disease was poorly understood and often deadly, caution felt reasonable. Avoiding frequent bathing was not neglect in their minds, but a form of protection. Because of this, the idea of washing too often could even feel dangerous. A woman who sought out regular bathing might have been viewed as careless with her health, or at the very least unnecessary in her actions. The balance leaned toward restraint rather than repetition. Less was safer. Less was normal. Daily life continued. Within this understanding, women moved through their routines wearing layers of fabric that stayed close to the body for long periods. Sweat did not disappear. It dried into the skin and into the fibers of clothing. Dust settled slowly, becoming part of the surface rather than something to be removed. The body and its surroundings blended in ways that no one actively tried to separate. Inside homes, the conditions reinforced this pattern. Spaces were often enclosed with limited airflow. Fires burned for warmth and cooking, filling the air with smoke that lingered long after the flames settled. The scent of the environment mixed with the scent of the body, and over time, these layers became familiar. Familiarity replaced discomfort. Clothing quietly took on the role that water did not. Layers were changed when possible, especially the inner garments, which were believed to carry away the body's impurities. This created a sense that something was being managed, even if the body itself, remained untouched. Clean fabric against the skin gave the impression of renewal, even when nothing beneath it had changed. For many women, the practical side of bathing also made it hard to maintain. Water had to be collected, often carried from a distance. It had to be heated, which required time and fuel. Privacy was not always guaranteed, especially in crowded living spaces. A full bath became an event that interrupted the day rather than fitting into it. It demanded effort, and effort was reserved for things that felt necessary. As days turned into weeks and weeks into longer stretches, the body adjusted. The skin adapted to the absence of washing, the senses dulled to what was constant. What might have once been noticeable became part of the background. The human mind, faced with repetition, tends to normalize what it cannot easily change. And in this case, it reshaped the very idea of what it meant to feel clean. From the outside, nothing seemed obviously wrong. A woman could stay, pee into a public space, her posture steady, her clothing arranged with care, and no one would see anything unusual. There was no clear sign that her body had not been fully washed for a long time. The absence of bathing did not create a visible disruption. It remained hidden beneath layers of fabric and expectation. What is striking is how complete this acceptance was. There was no widespread urgency to change it, no shared sense that something essential was missing. When an entire community lives within the same pattern, that pattern becomes invisible. There is no comparison to reveal it, no contrast to question it. It simply is. If we imagine this in a modern context, it would be like living without ever forming the habit of daily hygiene and never feeling the absence of it. There would be no discomfort tied to skipping it, because there would be no understanding of what was being skipped. Cleanliness would not be defined by removal, but by routine. I cannot help but notice how easily the body and mind adapt when a condition is shared by everyone. What might seem unbearable in one context becomes completely ordinary in another. The absence of frequent bathing did not create constant distress. Instead, it quietly shaped expectations until there was nothing left to question. Over time, the body carried its own record of this way of living. Each day left something behind, not just physically, but as part of a larger habit that settled into place. And because that habit was reinforced by every person around them, it did not feel like something that needed to be changed or improved. Bathing, when it happened, stood apart from all of this. It was rare enough to feel significant, almost ceremonial in its presence. Then it disappeared again, leaving the body to return to its usual state. The contrast was brief, and the memory of it faded quickly. This created a quiet contradiction. There was an awareness that washing could be beneficial, yet no drive to make it consistent. The gap between knowing and doing remained wide, and over generations, it stayed that way. The body existed within that gap, adapting to it, accepting it. In the end, the absence of regular bathing was not seen as a failure, but as a normal condition of life. It influenced how women understood their bodies, how they moved through their days, and how they defined what it meant to be clean. It was steady, unnoticed, and deeply ingrained. This was a world where not bathing was not seen as neglect, but as a normal part of life that no one thought to question. What came next was not the absence of cleaning, but a method that felt convincing enough to replace it entirely. In the next part, you will see how women used dry cloth to rub their skin, spreading layers of sweat and oil across their bodies while believing they had removed them completely. Water was not understood as a source of protection, but as something that could quietly expose the body to harm if used without restraint. The surf. Ace of the skin was believed to act as a barrier, a layer that kept illness outside where it belonged. When that surface was disturbed too often, it was thought to weaken the body rather than strengthen it. This belief did not exist as a rule written down somewhere. It lived in daily habits, in quiet decisions, and in the way people explained sickness to themselves. The idea that water could open the pores carried a particular weight. The skin was imagined as something that could loosen, soften, and allow things to pass through if treated the wrong way. Once the pores were opened, the body was no longer sealed. It became vulnerable in a way that felt difficult to control. In a world where disease appeared suddenly and without warning, this idea offered a simple explanation that people could hold on to. Because of this, direct contact with water was approached carefully. It was not avoided entirely, but it was limited. Washing the hands or the face could be done in small amounts, often with hesitation. But full immersion, the act of submerging the entire body, felt unnecessary at best and dangerous at worst. There was no sense that the body needed to be washed completely in order to remain healthy. Instead of turning toward water, people turned away from it. Avoidance became a form of care. The less the body was exposed, the safer it seemed. This did not feel like neglect. It felt like caution. A woman who chose not to bathe regularly was not ignoring her body. She was protecting it in the way she had been taught, in the way everyone around her understood to be correct. The environment around them reinforced this belief. Water sources were often shared with animals, waste, and the remnants of daily life. Rivers carried whatever was thrown into them, and there was no reliable way to separate what was clean from what was not. Looking at this, it was easy to assume that water itself carried hidden dangers. Immersing the body in it did not promise cleanliness. It introduces, said uncertainty. Within the home, preparing water for bathing was not a simple task. It required time, effort, and resources. Water had to be gathered, often carried from a distance, then heated carefully. This was not something that could be done quickly or casually. When combined with the belief that too much exposure could be harmful, the effort no longer seemed worthwhile. It was easier and safer to avoid it. Over time, this avoidance shaped how women understood their own bodies. Cleanliness was no longer about removing what the body carried. It became about maintaining balance, about not disturbing what was already there. The body was seen as something that could manage itself if left alone. Interference, especially through water, was what introduced risk. From the outside, this did not appear extreme. It was simply how things were done. Everyone followed similar patterns, so there was no reason to question it. A woman who rarely bathed did not stand out. She blended into the rhythm. Her of daily life, her choices supported by the beliefs of the people around her. What is unsettling is how convincing this logic was. Without an understanding of bacteria or hygiene as we know it, the idea that water could bring illness felt reasonable. When people fell sick after bathing, which sometimes happened due to exposure to cold or contaminated sources, it seemed to confirm what they already believed. The pattern reinforced itself. If we compare this to today, it would be like avoiding something essential, not because it is unavailable, but because it is misunderstood. The absence of knowledge does not feel like absence. It feels like certainty. People act with confidence, even when that confidence is built on an incomplete understanding. I find it difficult to ignore how this belief quietly shaped everything else. It did not exist on its own. It supported the idea that frequent bathing was unnecessary, even dangerous. It justified the absence of water in daily life and made that absence feel correct. When a belief aligns with convenience, it becomes even stronger. As days passed without full washing, the body adjusted again. It adapted to a life where water was not part of regular care. The skin remained covered, untouched by immersion. And over time, this state felt natural. There was no clear moment when something felt wrong. The change was gradual, almost invisible. This created a form of hygiene that relied more on avoidance than action. Instead of removing what had accumulated, people focused on not introducing new risks. The body was left largely as it was, managed indirectly, rather than cleaned directly. It was a system that felt stable, even if it was not effective in the way we would understand it now. There was also a sense of reassurance in this approach. Avoiding water gave people the feeling that they were doing something to protect themselves. In a world filled with uncertainty, where illness could strike without warning, that sense of control mattered. Even if the method was flawed, the intention felt sound. Over time, this way of thinking became deeply embedded. It was no longer questioned. It was passed down, repeated, and reinforced through daily life. The idea that water could be harmful shaped behavior so completely that alternatives began to take its place without resistance. The result was a body that remained in a constant state of accumulation, but one that did not feel neglected. It felt maintained, cared for in a way that made sense within that world. And because everyone shared the same understanding, there was no reason to imagine something different. This belief did not just reduce the use of water. It redirected the entire concept of cleanliness. It shifted attention away from washing and toward other methods that seemed safer, methods that avoided the risks associated with moisture and immersion. Water was no longer something to rely on, but something to step away from quietly and consistently. In its place, people turned to materials that could absorb what the body released without ever truly removing it. In the next part, you will see how linen garments were used as a substitute for washing, trapping layers of sweat and oil against the skin while giving the illusion that the body had been cleaned. Linen garments were not simply clothing. They were treated as a quiet solution to a problem that was rarely addressed directly. Instead of washing the body, people relied on fabric to manage what the body produced. The idea was simple and widely accepted. If the cloth could absorb sweat and impurities, then the body itself did not need to be washed as often. Cleanliness was no longer something done to the skin, but something transferred onto what was worn closest to it. The belief that linen could draw out what the body released gave it a special role. It was not just another layer of clothing. It was seen as a kind of filter, something that could take in moisture, oil, and dirt, leaving the body in a better state than before. When a woman changed her inner garments, it felt like a form of renewal, even if her skin had not been touched by water at all. This created a system where cleanliness was defined by what was removed from sight rather than what was actually removed from the body. As long as the linen appeared fresh, there was a sense that something had been done. The act of changing clothes replaced the act of washing. It was indirect, but it felt sufficient. The texture of linen reinforced this belief. It was rougher than the outer fabrics, sitting close against the skin and collecting what the body gave off throughout the day. Sweat did not disappear. It moved into the fibers. Oils did not vanish. They spread across the surface of the cloth. Over time, the garment carried a record of everything the body had released. From the outside, this system appeared effective. A woman could change into a fresh linen shift, adjust her outer clothing, and present herself as clean and orderly. There was no visible sign that anything was wrong. The body beneath remained hidden, and so it remained unquestioned. What is unsettling is how convincing this felt. The act of removing a worn garment and replacing it with a clean one gave a strong sense of improvement. It created a moment of difference that could be felt immediately. But that difference existed only at the level of fabric. The skin itself remained unchanged. Over time, the linen did not just absorb what the body released. It held onto it. Layers built slowly within the fibers. Even when garments were washed, which did not always happen frequently, not everything was removed. The fabric carried traces of previous wear, and those traces returned to the skin when the garment was worn again. This created a quiet cycle. The body released sweat and oils. The linen absorbed them. The linen was worn again, sometimes only partially cleaned, and the cycle continued. What was meant to take something away often ended up returning it in a different form. Inside this system, there was no clear moment where the body was fully reset. There was no point where everything was removed and the skin returned to a neutral state. Instead, there was a constant exchange between body and fabric, each passing something back to the other. The environment added to this effect. Clothing was not always stored in clean, dry conditions. It was kept in spaces that carried their own layers of dust and moisture. When linen was worn again, it did not start from nothing. It brought with it everything it had collected before. Despite this, the belief remained strong. Linen was trusted. It was seen as doing its job, quietly managing what the body produced. The absence of direct washing did not feel like a problem because something else had taken its place. That replacement felt enough. If we compare this to today, it would be like changing into clean clothes and assuming that the body underneath had also been cleaned, even though it had not. The distinction between fabric and skin would blur. The visible change would stand in for an invisible one that never happened. I find it difficult to ignore how easily this substitution took hold. It did not require effort in the same way bathing did. It fit naturally into daily life. Changing clothes was simple, familiar, and socially reinforced. Because it was easy, it became the standard. The body adapted again. It adjusted to a life where direct washing was rare and where fabric carried the responsibility instead. The skin remained covered, interacting constantly with the same materials, absorbing and releasing, without ever being fully cleared. Over time, this created a layered experience of the body. Nothing was ever completely removed. It was only shifted, absorbed, and redistributed. The idea of cleanliness became something that existed at the surface of clothing, not at the level of the skin itself. There was also a quiet reassurance in this method. It gave the feeling that something was being done. It provided a sense of order in a system that avoided water and direct washing. Even if the results were limited, the process itself felt reliable. The more this belief was repeated, the less it was questioned. Linen became a central part of how women understood hygiene. It was not an alternative, it was the method. And because everyone relied on it, there was no reason to see its limits clearly. The result was a body that remained in constant contact with what it produced, never fully separated from it. The linen did not remove the past. It carried it forward. Each new day added another layer, not only to the fabric, but to the experience of the body itself. What began as a practical solution slowly became a defining habit. It shaped how cleanliness was imagined, how it was practiced, and how it was measured. The body was no longer something to be washed, but something to be managed through layers, and because those layers were always present. The true state of the body remained hidden, even from the person who carried it. Linen created the feeling of cleanliness without ever truly removing what the body had accumulated. That illusion was strong enough to replace washing entirely, making people trust what they could not see. What comes next is even more unsettling. As women began rubbing their skin with dry cloth, spreading layers of sweat, oil, and dirt across their bodies while believing they had wiped everything away. Wiping the body with a dry cloth became a quiet replacement for washing, a method that felt simple, controlled, and safe. Instead of immersing the body in water, women would take pieces of fabric and press them against the skin, moving them slowly across the surface. It was a deliberate act, repeated in small motions, guided by the belief that something was being removed with each pass. The cloth itself became the point of contact, the only barrier between the body and the idea of cleanliness. As it moved across the skin, it gathered what it could reach. Sweat that had dried on the surface, loose dust that had settled during the day, and small traces of oil were lifted just enough to be noticed. The sensation created a feeling of change, subtle but present. This feeling was important. It gave the impression that the body had been refreshed, even without water. The skin might feel slightly different under the touch of the cloth, less sticky, less uneven. That small difference was enough to confirm that the method was working. It did not need to be complete. It only needed to be convincing. What remained, however, was not truly gone. The deeper layers of oil, the residue that had settled into the texture of the skin, and the accumulation from previous days stayed in place. The cloth could only move what was already loose. It could not dissolve or fully remove what had bonded with the surface over time. Instead of removing these layers, the act of wiping often spread them. As the cloth passed over one part of the body and then another, it carried with it what it had collected before. Oils were redistributed, thinly pressed across new areas of skin. Dust that had been concentrated in one place became less visible, but more evenly present. From a distance, this created the appearance of improvement. The skin no longer held visible patches of dirt. It looked more consistent, more even. But this consistency came not from removal, but from distribution. What had been gathered in one place was now spread across the surface in a thinner layer. The method relied heavily on what could be seen and felt immediately. If the cloth showed signs of use, if it carried visible marks after wiping, It reinforced the belief that something had been taken away. The evidence was there in the fabric. It created a clear, tangible result that felt reliable. Over time, this reinforced the habit. Women learned to trust the process because it produced a visible outcome. The cloth changed, and that chapter. Ange stood in for what was happening to the body. The skin, even if it remained largely the same, was assumed to have improved because something had been transferred away from it. The absence of water made this method feel safer. There was no concern about opening the body to illness, no fear of exposure through moisture. Everything remained controlled, contained within the simple movement of fabric across skin. It fit easily into daily life, requiring little preparation and no interruption. The environment supported this practice as well. In spaces where water was limited or avoided, dry methods became practical solutions. They did not depend on external conditions. They could be done quickly, quietly, and repeatedly. This convenience made them more appealing than anything that required greater effort. As the habit settled in, the body adapted once again. The skin became accustomed to this form of contact, to the regular pressure of cloth rather than the cleansing effect of water. The senses adjusted, recognizing the feeling of wiping as a sign of care. Over time, this sensation replaced the idea of washing altogether. From the outside, nothing seemed out of place. A woman who maintained this routine could present herself as clean, her clothing arranged, her posture composed. There were no obvious signs that anything was lacking. The method worked well enough to maintain appearance, and appearance was what mattered most. What is striking is how complete the illusion became. The act of wiping did not feel like a compromise. It felt like a solution. It offered a way to address the body without engaging with the risks associated with water. It provided a sense of control in a world where much remained uncertain. If we compare this to today, it would be like using a dry cloth to clean something that requires water and accepting the result as sufficient simply because it looks better than before. The surface improves, but the deeper layers remain unchanged. The difference. See, subtle but important. I find it difficult to overlook how easily this method replaced something more effective. It did not need to be perfect. It only needed to create a believable result. Once that result was accepted, there was no reason to seek anything else. The body continued to carry what it always had. Each day added to it. Each movement of the cloth shifted it slightly, but never fully removed it. The cycle continued quietly, reinforced by habit and belief. Over time, the distinction between clean and unclean became less about reality and more about perception. If the skin looked even and felt less rough, it was considered clean enough. The deeper state of the body remained hidden even from the person who carried it. This created a system where effort and outcome did not fully align. The work of wiping felt meaningful, but its effects were limited. Still, the feeling it produced was enough to sustain the practice. The more it was repeated, the more it became part of daily life. It no longer felt like a replacement. It felt like the natural way to care for the body. And because it was shared by everyone, it was never questioned. In the end, wiping the body with a dry cloth did not remove what had accumulated. It moved it, softened its appearance, and spread it across the surface. But because this process created a visible change, it was accepted as complete. Wiping the body gave the illusion of cleanliness, while quietly leaving everything in place beneath the surface. That illusion became so convincing that no one felt the need to question it. The next shift is even more unsettling, as the natural smell of the body was no longer something to remove, but something people learned to accept as normal, blending into daily life without resistance. The smell of the body was not something people expected to remove, but something they gradually learned to live with. It did not stand out as a problem that needed solving. It was simply there, part of the presence of a person, as constant and familiar as the clothes they wore or the spaces they moved through each day. In an environment where everyone carried a similar scent, it did not draw attention. The air inside homes, markets, and narrow streets held layers of human presence that had built up over time. These layers were not separated or cleared away. They blended, forming a background that no one thought to question. What might seem overwhelming in another context became unremarkable here. Because of this, the goal was not to eliminate smell, but to avoid becoming noticeably different. A person did not need to be scentless. They only needed to remain within the range that others were used to. The boundary of what was acceptable was defined by the people around them, not by any objective standard. This created a quiet shift in how cleanliness was understood. It was no longer about removing everything that the body produced. It became about maintaining balance, about staying within a shared range that felt normal. As long as no one stood out, there was no reason to change anything. The body adapted to this expectation. Over time, the senses adjusted. Smell, like any constant sensation, faded into the background. What was once noticeable became less so, not because it had disappeared, but because it had become familiar. The mind learned to ignore what did not change. Inside homes, this effect was even stronger. Enclosed spaces held on to what passed through them. Air did not move freely, and what lingered became part of the environment. The scent of the body mixed with the scent of the room, creating a shared atmosphere that felt stable and predictable. Clothing added another layer to this system. Fabrics absorbed what the body released, holding on to it as they were worn again and again. These materials did not remove the scent, they carried it. Over time, the difference between the body and what it wore became less clear, each reinforcing the presence of the other. From the outside, nothing seemed out of place. A woman could walk through a crowded space surrounded by others, and no single presence would stand apart. The shared environment masked individual differences. What mattered was not absolute cleanliness, but relative consistency. This made the idea of removing all scent unnecessary. There was no expectation to reach a state of complete neutrality. Such a state was not part of daily experience. Instead, people focused on maintaining what was familiar, what felt aligned with those around them. What is striking is how this system removed the need for comparison. Without a clear reference for something different, there was no reason to question what existed. The absence of contrast made everything feel stable. Cleanliness became a social agreement rather than a physical condition. If we compare this to today, it would be like living in a space where a constant background smell exists, and over time, no one notices it anymore. It does not disappear. It simply becomes part of what the mind filters out. The difference lies in what we consider acceptable, not in what is physically present. I find it difficult to ignore how easily perception can shift under these conditions. The body does not need to change for the experience of it to feel different. When something is shared by everyone, it becomes invisible. It no longer demands attention. This shared experience also created a quiet pressure. While there was no need to remove the smell entirely, there was a need to avoid standing out. A person whose scent was noticeably stronger or different could draw attention in a way that felt uncomfortable. The goal was not perfection, but conformity. Because of this, small efforts were made to adjust rather than eliminate. People used what was available to soften or mask certain aspects, but not to remove them completely. These adjustments did not aim for cleanliness in the modern sense. They aimed for balance. Over time, this balance became the standard. It shaped how women understood their own bodies and how they moved through social spaces. Cleanliness was no longer something that could be defined in absolute terms. It existed within a range, and that range was constantly reinforced by the presence of others. The body continued to carry what it always had. Nothing was fully removed. It was simply accepted, integrated into daily life, in a way that no longer felt unusual. The absence of effort to eliminate it was not seen as neglect, it was seen as normal. This created a system where perception mattered more than reality. As long as a person fit within the shared expectation, there was no reason to question what lay beneath. The body could remain unchanged and still be considered acceptable. The longer this continued, the stronger the effect became. Habits formed around what felt comfortable, and comfort was defined by familiarity. The idea of removing all traces of the body's presence became unnecessary, even strange. In the end, the smell of the body was not treated as something to fight against, but something to exist alongside. It became part of the environment, part of the experience of being around others, part of what it meant to live within that world. Body scent was not removed, but slowly blended into a shared environment where no one noticed it anymore. This quiet acceptance erased the idea that anything needed to change, replacing it with a standard built entirely on familiarity. What follows is even more disturbing, as layers of herbs and oils were added on top of unwashed skin, creating a mixture of scent that masked nothing and only made the body more saturated over time. Fragrance was not used to attract or impress, but to make the air bearable in spaces where nothing was ever fully cleared away. It did not begin as something delicate or decorative. It existed as a response, a quiet adjustment to an environment that held onto everything that passed through it. In rooms where bodies, fabric, ICS, and smoke lingered together, scent became something that had to be managed, not removed. The air inside medieval homes was rarely still in a neutral way. It carried traces of daily life that did not disappear. Cooking fires left behind a constant haze that settled into walls and ceilings. Clothing that had absorbed the body's presence released it slowly back into the room. Breath, movement, and time added to this mixture, creating an atmosphere that felt dense and unchanging. Within this environment, herbs and natural oils were introduced not to cleanse the body, but to soften what surrounded it. Small bundles of plants, dried and tied together, were placed in corners or hung where they could influence the air. Oils were rubbed onto fabrics or dabbed lightly onto skin. These scents did not replace what was already there. They joined it. The result was not a clear, fresh space, but a layered one. The natural smell of the body did not disappear. It blended with the sharpness of herbs, the warmth of oils, and the residue of smoke. Each layer remained present, creating a mixture that was more complex, but not necessarily cleaner. This layering created the impression of improvement. The sharp edge of one scent could make another feel less noticeable. The presence of something fragrant shifted attention away from what was underneath. It did not remove the source. It changed how it was perceived. For many women, this became part of how they navigated their environment. They did not expect the air to be empty or neutral. They expected it to be filled, but filled in a way that felt manageable. Adding scent was a way of adjusting that balance, making the space feel less overwhelming without changing its underlying state. The body itself became part of this process. Oils and scented materials were applied not to clean the skin, but to alter how it was experienced by others. The surface remained the same, carrying what it had accumulated over time. The added fragrance sat on top, creating a new layer rather than removing the old one. From the outside, this could seem like care. A woman who carried the scent of herbs or oils might be perceived as more refined, more controlled. But that perception was built on what could be sensed immediately, not on what had actually changed. The body beneath remained untouched by any real form of cleaning. What is striking is how well this worked within that world, because everyone lived in similar conditions. The addition of fragrance created a noticeable shift. It stood out just enough to suggest effort without requiring any fundamental change. It fit easily into the existing system. The environment reinforced this habit. Enclosed spaces held on to scent in the same way they held on to everything else. Once introduced, fragrance did not vanish quickly. It lingered, mixing with what was already present. Over time, the air became a combination of many different sources, each layered over the other. This created a kind of stability.
The air did not change suddenly. It shifted slowly as new layers were added and old ones faded. There was no moment of complete clarity, no point where everything was reset.
Instead, there was a continuous blending, a steady accumulation that felt normal. If we compare this to today, it would be like adding fragrance to a space that has not been cleaned, relying on scent to change perception rather than addressing the source. The result might feel more pleasant at first, but the underlying conditions remain unchanged. The difference lies in what is noticed, not in what is present. I find it difficult to overlook how easily this substitution took hold. It did not require the effort that washing did. It did not challenge existing beliefs about water or the body. It simply added something new on top of what was already there. Because it was simple, it became widespread. Over time, this practice shaped how people understood their surroundings. Cleanliness was no longer tied to reason. Removal. It was tied to balance, to the careful layering of scent in a way that felt acceptable. The absence of unpleasantness became more important than the presence of cleanliness. The body continued to carry its own layers, unchanged by the addition of fragrance. Each application added something new, but removed nothing. The surface became more complex, more saturated, but not cleaner in any meaningful sense. This created a quiet illusion. The presence of a pleasant scent suggested that something had been improved. It reassured those who experienced it, allowing them to overlook what remained beneath. The illusion did not need to be perfect. It only needed to be convincing enough. The longer this continued, the more it became part of daily life. Fragrance was not seen as an addition. It was expected. It filled the spaces where cleaning did not occur, creating a sense of completeness that was not truly there. In the end, scent did not replace what the body carried. It layered over it, blending into an environment that was already dense with presence. The result was not a removal of what had accumulated, but a transformation of how it was experienced. Fragrance did not cleanse the body or the space. It simply added another layer to what was already there. This layering made everything feel more tolerable while leaving the underlying reality untouched. Hair then became the next hidden problem, as it was rarely washed and instead kept covered for long periods, trapping sweat, oil, and buildup beneath layers of fabric without ever being properly cleaned. Hair was not something that needed to be washed regularly, but something that was kept out of sight for most of the time. Instead of being exposed and cleaned, it was covered, contained, and managed through layers of fabric that stayed in place throughout the day. The focus was not on maintaining the condition of the hair itself, but on ensuring that it remained hidden and controlled. Women wore head coverings as a norm, a part of daily life. Cloth wrapped around the head, caps fitted closely over the hair, and veils draped across it created a barrier between the hair and the outside world. These coverings were not occasional. They were constant, forming part of how a woman presented herself in both private and public spaces. The covering served more than one purpose. It followed social expectations, marking modesty and order, but it also created a way to avoid dealing with the hair directly. Once hidden, the hair no longer needed to be addressed in the same way. It became something that could be left alone for long periods without drawing attention. Beneath the fabric, the hair remained in the same state day after day. Oils produced by the scalp did not disappear. They spread slowly along the strands, settling into the texture of the hair. Dust and small particles collected over time, held in place by the natural oils that made the hair more adhesive. Without regular washing, these layers did not eat. They accumulated gradually, forming a condition that was rarely interrupted. The hair adapted to this state, just as the body had adapted to infrequent bathing. What might have felt heavy or noticeable at first became less so over time. The covering itself played an important role in maintaining this system. It did not remove what had built up. It contained it. Keeping the hair pressed close and out of view reduced the chances of anything being noticed. The fabric acted as a shield, not against dirt or oil, but against visibility. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. A woman, with her hair neatly covered, appeared composed and orderly. The condition of what lay beneath did not enter into consideration. The covering defined the appearance, and appearance was what mattered most. This created a separation between what was seen and what existed. The visible surface remained controlled and acceptable, while the hidden part remained unchanged. The two did not need to match. As long as knee was maintained, the other could be ignored. What is striking is how effective this concealment was. It removed the need to address the problem directly. If something cannot be seen, it does not demand attention. Over time, this absence of attention allowed the condition beneath the covering to become more established, more difficult to change. The environment contributed to this as well. Enclosed spaces, limited airflow, and constant exposure to the same surroundings affected the hair in the same way they affected the body. The hair carried traces of the environment just as the environment carried traces of the body. The two became closely linked. If we compare this to today, it would be like covering something completely and allowing it to remain untouched for long periods, assuming that its condition does not matter because it is not visible. The act of covering replaces the act of caring for it directly. I find it difficult to ignore how easily this became normal. The habit requires little effort once it was established. Covering the hair was already part of daily dress, so it did not feel like an additional step. It fit naturally into the rhythm of life, reinforcing itself through repetition. The body adapted once again. The scalp continued to produce oils. The hair continued to hold on to what it gathered, and the absence of washing became less noticeable. Sensation adjusted just as it had with the skin. What remained constant faded into the background. Occasionally, the hair might be uncovered, but these moments were brief and controlled. They did not lead to regular cleaning. Instead, they served as temporary interruptions before the covering returned, restoring the usual state. This created a quiet cycle where the hair was rarely reset, rarely brought back to a neutral condition. It remained in a continuous state of accumulation, shaped by what the body produced and what the environment added to it. The belief that covering was enough removed the need for anything more. It allowed women to maintain an appearance of order without addressing what lay beneath. This separation between appearance and reality became a defining feature of how hygiene was understood. Over time, the condition of the hair became something distant, something that existed but did not require constant attention. It was managed indirectly, just like the rest of the body, through methods that controlled perception rather than changing the underlying state. In the end, covering the hair did not solve anything. It hid it. It allowed everything beneath to remain in place, undisturbed, carried forward from one day to the next without interruption. Hair was not cleaned. It was simply kept out of sight long enough that its condition no longer mattered. This concealment made the problem invisible, allowing it to persist without resistance. The next shift becomes even more direct, as the tools used on hair were not for cleaning, but for pulling out what lived within it. Reveal. A problem that had been quietly growing beneath the surface. Combing the hair was not simply a matter of keeping it orderly, but one of the few direct ways people tried to manage what lived within it. Without regular washing, the hair became an environment that supported more than just the strands themselves. It held warmth, moisture, and the steady presence of the body, creating conditions where small parasites could exist and multiply over time. The comb became a tool that did more than arrange hair into place. It moved through the strands slowly, catching what could not be seen at a distance. With each pass, it pulled through not only tangles, but also the tiny forms that had settled close to the scalp. This was not an occasional act. It was repeated, careful, and often expected. The motion of combing created a sense that something was being addressed. As the teeth of the comb dragged across the scalp, there was a visible result. Small particles caught between the teeth could be seen and removed. This provided immediate evidence that the process was working. Something had been taken away. Yet, what was removed was only part of what was present. The comb could reach what was close to the surface, what was caught in the path of its movement, but it could not reach everything. It could not fully clear what had settled deeper, or what remained attached in ways that resisted simple removal. This created a pattern of partial control. The problem was not eliminated, but managed. Each session of combing reduced what was visible, but did not remove the source entirely. Over time, what was taken away would return, rebuilding quietly in the same environment that had never been fully cleared. The act itself became a routine, integrated into daily or near-daily life. It required attention, but not the kind of effort that bathing demanded. It could be done in small moments, repeated as needed, without disrupting the larger rhythm of the day. This made it practical, and because it was practical, it became trusted. The comb also reinforced the idea that direct washing was unnecessary. If something could be removed through mechanical action, then there was less need to introduce water. The process felt controlled and contained. It avoided the risks that people associated with moisture, while still producing a visible result. From the outside, this did not appear unusual. Combing the hair was a normal part of grooming. It was expected, even necessary. But what it addressed beneath the surface was rarely spoken about directly. The presence of parasites was understood, but treated as something to be managed quietly rather than eliminated. The environment of the hair remained unchanged. The warmth of the scalp, the oils that spread along the strands, and the limited disturbance created a stable space where these organisms could continue to exist. The comb disrupted this space briefly, but it did not transform it. What is unsettling is how this method created a sense of control without offering a complete solution. The act of removal gave the impression that the problem was being handled. Each visible result confirmed that belief, but the underlying conditions remained the same, allowing the cycle to continue. If we compare this to today, it would be like addressing only what can be seen while leaving the conditions that allow it to return completely untouched. The surface improves, but the source remains active. The difference is subtle at first, but becomes clear over time. I find it difficult to ignore how this approach fits so easily into the broader pattern of hygiene. It did not challenge existing beliefs about water. It did not require significant resources. It provided immediate feedback. All of these factors made it feel reliable, even when it was incomplete. The body adapted once again. The presence of what lived within the hair became part of the experience, something that was addressed regularly, but never fully removed. The discomfort, if it was noticed, became familiar. The process of combing became the response, repeated as needed. Over time, the distinction between solving a problem and managing it became less clear. The regular use of the comb blurred that line. As long as something could be removed, it felt as though progress was being made. The return of the same problem did not break that belief. It simply reinforced the need to repeat the process. This created a cycle that was both visible and hidden. The act of combing was visible, a clear sign of care and attention. What it addressed remained mostly unseen, revealed only in small moments when something was caught and removed. The larger picture stayed out of view. The more this cycle continued, the more it became part of what it meant to maintain the body. It did not feel insufficient. It felt complete enough. And because it aligned with everything else, with the avoidance of water, with the reliance on fabric and indirect methods, it was never questioned deeply. In the end, the comb did not eliminate what lived within the hair. It reduced it temporarily, keeping it within a range that felt manageable. But the conditions that allowed it to exist remained unchanged, ensuring that the process would need to be repeated again and again. The comb did not clean the hair. It only removed what it could reach while leaving everything else in place. This constant cycle of removal and return made the problem feel untrolled without ever being solved. Another layer of this hidden accumulation appears in the place meant for rest, where beds quietly held onto sweat, skin, and residue night after night without ever being fully cleared away. Beds were not places where the body was separated from what it carried, but spaces where everything followed it and remained. The act of lying down did not create a break in the cycle of accumulation. It extended it. What had settled on the skin throughout the day was brought into the bed and left there night after night without interruption. The structure of the bed itself encouraged this. Layers of straw formed the base, packed together to create something soft enough to rest on, yet porous enough to hold whatever passed into it. Above that, fabrics were laid out, often used repeatedly over long periods. These materials were not replaced often. They remained in place, slowly collecting everything they came into contact with. Each night added something new. The body released moisture as it rested, not in sudden amounts, but in a steady, quiet way that went unnoticed. Sweat, oils, and small particles from the skin were transferred into the layers beneath. Dust that had settled during the day came with the body and stayed within the bed. Over time, these additions built upon one another. There was no clear moment when this accumulation was removed. The bed was not reset regularly. It did not return to a neutral state. Instead, it carried forward everything it had gathered, holding it within its structure. What was left behind did not disappear. It became part of the bed itself. The environment of the sleeping space reinforced this process. Rooms were often enclosed with limited movement of air. What settled into the bed remained there undisturbed. There was no consistent flow to carry it away, no regular clearing that would interrupt the cycle. The bed became a place where the body's presence was preserved rather than reduced. From the outside, nothing appeared unusual. The bed looked arranged, its surface smoothed and prepared for rest. There were no visible signs of what it contained beneath its outer layer. The absence of visible disorder gave the impression that everything was in place, that nothing needed to be changed. This created a quiet illusion. The act of lying down felt like a form of relief, a pause in the day. But the space itself was not separate from what the body carried. It was an extension of it. The same elements that had settled on the skin during the day continued to exist in the place meant for rest. Over time, the distinction between the body and the bed became less clear. Each influenced the other. The bed held what the body left behind, and the body returned to it night after night, coming into contact with what had accumulated before. The cycle repeated without interruption. What is striking is how little attention this received. The bed was not seen as something that required frequent cleaning. It was stable, fixed in place, and treated as part of the environment rather than something that needed to be maintained actively. Because it did not change visibly, it did not demand attention. The materials themselves contributed to this effect. Straw compressed over time, holding within it what had settled there. Fabric absorbed what it touched, carrying traces that were not easily removed. Even when adjustments were made, they were often partial, not enough to fully clear what had built up. If we compare this to today, it would be like returning each night to a surface that has been steadily collecting everything the body produces without ever fully resetting it. The familiarity of the space would make it feel clean enough, even if it was not. I find it difficult to overlook how easily this became normal. The bed was associated with rest, with comfort, with the end of the day. That association made it feel separate from the concerns of cleanliness. Even though it was deeply connected. To them, what felt comforting was not necessarily clean. The body adapted once again. It returned to the same environment repeatedly, adjusting to what it encountered there. The sensations became familiar, and familiarity reduced the need to question them. What might have been noticeable at first became part of the background. The cycle continued quietly. Each night added another layer. Each morning left it behind. There was no clear break, no moment where everything was removed and replaced. The bed carried the history of many nights, layered together in a way that was rarely acknowledged. This created a system where rest and accumulation existed side by side. The place meant to provide relief also held onto everything that had been carried through the day. The two were not separated. They were combined, forming a continuous loop. The longer this continued, the more the bed became part of the body's extended environment. It was no longer just a place to lie down. It was a surface that interacted with the body in a constant, ongoing way, shaping the experience of rest without being noticed. Because this interaction was hidden beneath the surface, it remained out of focus. Attention stayed on what could be seen, on the arrangement of the bed, on the order of the room. What lay within it did not enter into consideration. In the end, the bed did not remove what the body carried. It preserved it. It held on to it, night after night, becoming a quiet extension of the same cycle that shaped every other part of daily life. Beds did not separate the body from what it carried. They stored it and returned it with each night of rest. This made the act of sleeping part of the same cycle of accumulation that was never fully interrupted. The illusion continues through clothing, where a neat outer layer concealed everything beneath, allowing the body to remain unchanged while still appearing clean. Clothing did more than cover the body. It replaced the need to reveal it.
Thick layers.
A fabric created a surface that others could see, and that surface became the only part that mattered. As long as it appeared orderly, the condition beneath it did not need to be questioned. The body itself became secondary to what surrounded it. The structure of clothing reinforced this idea. Garments were not light or minimal. They were built in layers, each one adding weight, shape, and distance between the body and the outside world. Fabric rested over fabric, creating a barrier that was both physical and visual. What lay beneath these layers remained hidden even in proximity. This concealment allowed appearance to take priority. A woman could present herself in carefully arranged clothing, her posture steady, her outer layer free from visible disorder. This was enough to signal that she was clean, or at least acceptable. The judgment did not extend beyond what could be seen. Because of this, attention shifted away from the body itself. There was little reason to focus on what lay beneath when it had no direct impact on how a person was perceived. Cleanliness became something that could be achieved through arrangement rather than removal. Order replaced purity. The fabric itself carried part of the responsibility. Outer garments were maintained with care, adjusted, smoothed, and kept presentable. This maintenance created a sense of control. It provided visible proof that effort had been made. As long as the outer layer remained intact, the deeper layers did not need to be addressed. Underneath, the body continued, as it always had. Sweat remained, oils spread across the skin, and the accumulation from previous days persisted. None of this was visible, and because it was not visible, it did not demand attention. The absence of visibility became a form of protection. This created a clear division between what was shown and what was hidden. The outer layer represented order and control. The inner state remained unchanged, existing quietly beneath the surface. The T. Woe did not need to match. As long as the visible part met expectations, the rest could be ignored. The environment supported this separation. In spaces where people interacted closely, visual cues carried more weight than anything else. A well-dressed appearance signaled stability, respectability, and care. It did not reveal what lay beneath, but it did not need to. The surface was enough. Over time, this shifted the meaning of cleanliness. It was no longer about removing what the body carried. It became about managing how the body was presented. The act of dressing became a substitute for the act of washing. It provided the same sense of completion without requiring the same effort. What is striking is how effective this substitution was. It allowed people to meet social expectations without changing the underlying condition of the body. It created a system where perception aligned with acceptance, even if it did not align with reality. If we compare this to today, it would be like just gauging cleanliness entirely by what is visible, ignoring everything that cannot be seen. The result might appear complete, but it would not reflect the actual state of the body. The difference lies in what is prioritized. I find it difficult to overlook how easily this became the standard. It did not challenge existing beliefs. It fit naturally into daily routines. Getting dressed was already necessary, so it carried additional meaning without requiring additional effort. This made it both practical and persuasive. The body adapted once again. It remained in the same condition beneath the layers, adjusting to a life where it was rarely exposed or reset. The absence of direct care did not feel urgent because it did not interfere with how the body was perceived by others. Clothing became more than protection or decoration. It became a tool for shaping perception. It allowed a woman to control how she was seen, even if she could not fully control the condition of her own body. This control was enough to maintain a sense of order. The longer this continued, the stronger the separation became. The visible layer took on more importance while the hidden layer faded further from attention. The body itself became something distant, something managed indirectly rather than addressed directly. This created a quiet contradiction. The effort put into maintaining appearance did not extend to the body itself. The surface was cared for while what lay beneath remained unchanged. Yet this contradiction did not feel like a problem. It felt normal. The system worked because it aligned with how people interacted. Judgments were made quickly based on what could be seen. There was no need to look deeper. The outer layer provided enough information to form an impression, and that impression was accepted as truth. In the end, clothing did not just cover the body. It defined how the body was understood. It allowed cleanliness to exist at the level of appearance, leaving the underlying reality untouched. The body remained in its usual state, hidden beneath layers that suggested something else entirely. Clothing did not make the body clean. It only made it appear that way to everyone who looked at it. This reliance on appearance replaced the need to address what was hidden beneath the surface. Washing then became focused on garments rather than the body itself, leaving skin unchanged while fabric was cleaned and worn again over the same layers that had never been removed. Washing was not absent from daily life, but it was directed away from the body and toward the things that surrounded it. Clothing, rather than skin, became the main focus of cleaning. Garments were taken to water, scrubbed, rinsed, and returned to use while the body inside them remained largely unchanged. The act of washing existed, but it had been shifted to a different surface. Rivers and shared water sources became the place where this process took place. Fabrics were submerged, pressed, and worked by hand to remove what had built up over time. In some cases, ash or other materials were used to break down oils and stains. The effort was visible, deliberate, and repeated. It created a clear sense that something had been restored. This restoration, however, applied only to the fabric. The clothing emerged lighter in appearance, free from visible marks, and carrying a sense of renewal. When worn again, it gave the impression that everything it touched had also been refreshed. The connection between fabric and body blurred, allowing the effect of one to stand in for the other. The body beneath remained in the same condition as before. Sweat, oils, and the accumulation of previous days did not disappear simply because the clothing had been cleaned. They stayed in place unchanged, even as fresh fabric was placed over them. The difference existed only at the surface. This created a quiet transfer of meaning. Cleanliness moved from the body to the garment. Instead of asking whether the skin, its elf had been cleared, attention focused on whether the clothing looked and felt clean. The visible result replaced the invisible reality. The process of washing clothing reinforced this belief. It required time, effort, and physical work. Because it demanded something, it felt meaningful. The act itself became evidence of care, even if that care was not directed at the body. The effort gave weight to the result. Over time, this pattern became stable. Women learned to maintain their appearance through what they wore, rather than through direct contact with water. Clean garments signaled order, and order signaled cleanliness. The body remained out of focus, hidden beneath layers that suggested something different. From the outside, this system appeared effective. A woman dressed in freshly washed clothing could move through public spaces without drawing attention. There were no visible signs of neglect. The outer layer carried the entire impression, and that impression was accepted without. Question. What is striking is how complete this substitution became. The idea that the body itself needed to be washed regularly faded into the background. It was replaced by a system that relied on objects rather than direct action. As long as the objects were maintained, the body did not need to be addressed. The environment supported this approach. Washing clothing could be done in shared spaces alongside others, creating a sense of routine and normality. It was a visible act, one that reinforced social expectations. Bathing, by contrast, remained private, infrequent, and often avoided. If we compare this to today, it would be like cleaning only what is worn, assuming that what lies beneath is improved by association. The surface changes, but the underlying condition remains the same. The difference is subtle, but it defines how cleanliness is understood. I find it difficult to ignore how this shift simplified daily life. Washing clothing fit more easily into existing routines. It did not challenge beliefs about water or the body. It allowed people to feel that something had been done without requiring a bigger change. Because it was easier, it became standard. The body adapted once again. It remained in a continuous state, rarely interrupted by direct cleaning. Each new layer of clothing interacted with what was already there, carrying forward what had not been removed. The cycle continued quietly, reinforced by habit. This created a separation between effort and effect. The work of washing clothing was real, visible, and consistent. The effect on the body, however, was limited. Still, the presence of effort made the system feel complete. It satisfied the need to act, even if it did not fully address the underlying condition. Over time, the distinction between cleaning the body and cleaning its surroundings became less important. The two were treated as connected, even when they were not. Clean clothing became a stand-in for a clean body, and that stand-in was
rarely questioned. The more this pattern repeated, the more it shaped how women understood care.
attention moved outward toward objects and appearance, while the body itself remained unchanged. The focus shifted from what was removed to what was replaced. This shift was subtle but powerful. It allowed cleanliness to exist as an idea, supported by visible actions, rather than as a physical state achieved through direct means. It made the absence of regular bathing less noticeable because something else filled its place. In the end, washing did not disappear. It was redirected. It became a process that maintained what could be seen while leaving what could not be seen untouched. The body continued as it had before, carrying its layers forward beneath a surface that suggested something different. Washing clothing created the impression that everything had been refreshed, even though the body beneath remained unchanged. This shift moved the idea of cleanliness away from the skin and into the objects that surrounded it. A more unsettling illusion emerges from this pattern, where a person could appear perfectly clean on the outside, while their body had not been properly washed at all. A person could appear completely clean without ever having truly washed their body. And within that world, this did not seem unusual. Cleanliness was not judged by what had been removed from the skin, but by what could be seen from the outside. The body itself remained hidden, while the surface presented to others carried the full weight of perception. The outer image was maintained with care. Clothing was arranged deliberately, smoothed, and adjusted to remove any sign of disorder. Fabrics were chosen and layered in ways that created a sense of structure and control. This visible effort became the primary signal of cleanliness. It replaced the need to examine anything beneath it. A fresh garment created a powerful effect. When a woman changed into clean clothing, the difference was immediate. The fabric felt lighter, the surface appeared more even, and the overall impression shifted. This change extended beyond the garment itself. It suggested that the body inside had also been refreshed, even when nothing had been done to it directly. This suggestion was enough. It did not need to be confirmed. The visible improvement allowed people to assume that everything else had followed. The connection between clothing and body became so strong that one stood in for the other without question. Beneath these layers, the body remained in its previous state. Sweat, oils, and the accumulation of days did not disappear. They stayed in place, carried forward beneath the surface. The difference between what was shown and what existed grew wider over time, but it remained hidden. The distance between appearance and reality became a quiet part of daily life. It was not something that needed to be acknowledged. As long as the outer layer met expectations, there was no reason to look further. The illusion held because it was never challenged. What is striking is how stable this illusion was. It did not require constant reinforcement. It sustained itself through repetition. Each time clothing was adjusted, each time a surface appeared clean, The belief was confirmed again. The body itself remained outside of that process. The environment supported this separation. Social interactions were based on what could be observed quickly. A well-presented appearance signaled order and care. There was no expectation to verify what lay beneath. The surface provided enough information to form a judgment. Over time, this shifted the meaning of cleanliness entirely. It was no longer tied to the condition of the body. It became a visual standard, something that could be achieved through the arrangement and maintenance of external elements. The body's actual state became less relevant. If we compare this to today, it would be like assuming something is clean simply because it looks clean, without considering what has not been addressed beneath the surface. The visual impression replaces the physical reality, and the two are treated as if they are the same. I find it difficult to overlook how easily this illusion could be accepted. It did not require effort beyond what was already part of daily life. Dressing, arranging, and maintaining clothing were already necessary. These actions gained additional meaning, standing in for something more direct. The body adapted once again. It continued in its usual state, rarely interrupted by full washing. The absence of direct care did not feel urgent, because the visible layer provided reassurance. The illusion reduced the need to question what was hidden. This created a system where perception guided behavior. As long as a person appeared clean, there was no need to pursue actual cleaning. The visible result shaped the understanding of what had been achieved, even if that understanding was incomplete. The longer this continued, the more the illusion solidified. It became part of how people understood themselves and others. Cleanliness was something that could be worn, something that could be displayed, rather than something that needed to be physically achieved. There was also a sense of control in this system. Managing appearance was easier than managing the body directly. It required less effort, less risk, and aligned with existing habits. Because it was easier, it became the preferred method. Over time, the gap between appearance and reality became wider, but also less noticeable. The illusion grew stronger as it was repeated. It did not feel like a contradiction. It felt like the natural way things were done. The body remained unchanged beneath the surface, carrying forward everything that had not been removed. The outer layer continued to suggest something different, creating a constant separation between what was seen and what existed. This separation defined how cleanliness was experienced. It was not about removing what was present, but about presenting something acceptable. The body became secondary to the image it projected, hidden beneath layers that told a different story. In the end, a person could move through the world appearing completely clean, while their body remained in a state that had not been fully addressed. The illusion did not need to be perfect. It only needed to be convincing enough to go unquestioned. Appearance became the only measure of cleanliness, allowing the body beneath to remain unchanged without consequence. This illusion was strong enough to replace direct care entirely, shaping how people understood their own condition. A deeper shift follows this, where even the spaces meant for bathing began to disappear, leaving fewer and fewer opportunities for the body to be truly washed at all. Public bathing once existed as a shared space where the body could be fully immersed and cleared, but over time these places slowly disappeared. What had once been common in certain towns and cities became less visible, then increasingly rare, until the act of bathing itself was pushed further away from daily life. The change did not happen suddenly. It unfolded gradually, shaped by fear, uncertainty, and shifting beliefs about what was safe. At one point, communal bathhouses provided a place where people could gather and wash. Water was available in larger quantities, and the act of immersion was not unusual within those walls. These spaces were structured around the idea that the body could be cleaned directly, that water could serve as a tool for removing what had accumulated. But over time, the perception of these places began to shift. Concerns about illness grew stronger, even if they were not fully understood. When people became sick after visiting shared spaces, it was easy to associate the two. The idea that disease could spread in these environments took hold, not as a proven fact, but as a convincing possibility. The body once again was seen as vulnerable when exposed. Immersion in shared water no longer felt like a solution. It began to feel like a risk. The same act that had once been associated with cleansing was now linked to danger, especially when performed in the presence of others. Alongside this fear, another concern developed. Bathhouses were not only places for washing, but also places where people gathered closely together. Over time, this closeness came to be viewed with suspicion. Questions about behavior, about what might happen in these shared spaces, added to the unease. These combined concerns slowly changed how people viewed public bathing. It was no longer simply about cleanliness. It became tied to ideas of health and morality, both of which carried weight in daily life. As these concerns grew, the presence of bathhouses began to decline. Closures did not happen all at once. Some remained for a time, but fewer people used them. Others were shut down entirely, either by local decisions or by gradual abandonment. Without regular use, the structures themselves faded from importance. They no longer held a central place in how people cared for their bodies. With the disappearance of these spaces, opportunities for full immersion became even more limited. Bathing, which had already been infrequent, became rarer still. There were fewer places where it could be done, and fewer reasons to consider it necessary. The absence of bathhouses reinforced existing habits. Without access to shared facilities, women relied even more on the methods they already used. Clothing, dry wiping, and indirect forms of care continued to replace direct washing. The system adapted, filling the space left behind. From the outside, this change did not appear dramatic. Daily life continued as before. People moved through their routines, their appearance maintained, their habits intact. The disappearance of bathhouses did not disrupt this flow. It simply removed one of the few alternatives that had existed. What is street? Hiking is how easily this transition was accepted. The loss of these spaces did not create a sense of urgency. It did not lead to a widespread effort to replace them. Instead, it fit into the broader pattern of avoiding water and relying on other methods. The environment adjusted to this absence. Without places dedicated to bathing, the idea of immersion became more distant. It was no longer part of the shared experience. It existed on the edges of life, rarely encountered, and even less frequently practiced. If we compare this to today, it would be like losing access to spaces designed for hygiene and gradually adjusting to a life without them, not because alternatives were better, but because the absence became normal. The change would feel less significant over time, even if its effects were substantial. I find it difficult to ignore how this shift reinforced everything that came before it. The fear of water, the reliance on fabric, and the acceptance of indirect methods all gained strength as one of the few direct options disappeared. The system became more closed, more self-contained. The body continued in its established pattern without opportunities for full washing. Nothing interrupted the accumulation that had already become part of daily life. Each day added to what was already there, and nothing fully removed it. Over time, the memory of regular bathing faded further. It became something distant, something associated with the past or with rare exceptions. The present was defined by what was available, and what was available no longer included shared spaces for washing. This created a quiet permanence. The absence of bathhouses was not felt as a loss, but as a continuation of what had already been happening. It confirmed the belief that direct washing was unnecessary, even undesirable. In the end, the disappearance of public baths did not just reduce access to water. It reshaped how people understood their bodies and how they cared for them. It removed one of the last visible connections to a different way of maintaining cleanliness. Public baths faded away, leaving behind a world where full washing became even more distant and uncommon. This absence strengthened the habits that avoided water and relied on indirect methods instead. The next shift brings the focus closer to the body again, where waste was not always removed immediately, but often remained near daily life, blurring the line between what was clean and what was not. Waste did not leave the body and disappear. It stayed close, lingering in the same spaces where daily life continued. There was no clear separation between what had been expelled and what remained part of the environment. The act of removal existed, but it was incomplete, leaving behind traces that settled into the surroundings rather than being fully taken away. The absence of structured systems meant that what the body produced often remained nearby. It did not move far from where it was created. Instead, it was carried short distances, placed in areas that were still connected to living spaces, or left in ways that allowed it to re-enter the environment gradually. The process of disposal was not final. It was temporary. Over time, this created a continuous exchange between the body and its surroundings. What was released did not vanish. It remained within reach, within the air, within the surfaces that people touched and moved through each day. The boundary that might have separated the body from its waste became less distinct. The environment absorbed these traces slowly. Floors, walls, and nearby areas carried what had been left behind. Air moved through these spaces, but not enough to fully clear them. Instead, it redistributed what was present, spreading it across a wider area without removing it entirely. This meant that contact did not end with the act of disposal. The body returned to the same environment repeatedly, encountering what had been left behind in different forms. The SEPA, ration between what had been inside the body and what existed outside of it, became less meaningful over time. From the outside, this was not always visible. The signs were not always obvious. Much of what remained blended into the surroundings, becoming part of the background rather than standing out as something distinct. Because it was not always seen clearly, it did not demand constant attention. This created a quiet normalization. The presence of waste or traces of it became something expected rather than avoided. It was not considered ideal, but it was not considered unusual either. It fit within the limits of what people understood as manageable. The body adapted once again. It existed within this environment, without a clear sense of separation. Contact with what had been discarded did not feel like a violation of cleanliness, because the idea of complete removal was not fully established. The concept of distance between body and waste was less defined. Clothing and surfaces play a role. A role in carrying these traces. Fabrics absorbed what was present in the environment, holding on to it and bringing it into closer contact with the body. The cycle continued, not through a single action, but through repeated exposure over time. What is striking is how this blurred the meaning of clean and unclean. Without a clear boundary, the distinction became less precise. Cleanliness was no longer defined by absence, but by tolerance. As long as something remained within an acceptable range, it did not need to be addressed further. If we compare this to today, it would be like living in a space where what is discarded never fully leaves, where it continues to exist in small, persistent ways. Over time, that presence would become familiar, and familiarity would reduce the urgency to remove it completely. I find it difficult to overlook how easily this condition could be accepted. It did not arise from a single decision, but from the absence of systems that could support a different outcome. Without those systems, people adjusted to what was possible, redefining what felt normal. The environment reinforced this adjustment. Each day added new traces while older ones remained. There was no clear reset, no moment where everything returned to a neutral state. Instead, there was a steady layering that shaped the experience of living in those spaces. The body remained part of this cycle. It contributed to it, and it was affected by it. The distinction between the two faded, replaced by a continuous interaction that was rarely interrupted. What had been inside the body became part of the environment, and the environment in turn influenced the body again. Over time, this created a stable condition, one that did not change dramatically from day to day. Because it was stable, it felt manageable. The absence of sudden change made it easier to accept, even if the underlying state was far from ideal. The idea of complete separation between body and waste did not take hold. There was a constant proximity, a closeness that shaped how people moved through their daily routines. It was not something that required attention at every moment. It was something that simply existed. This proximity influenced how cleanliness was understood. It was no longer about removing everything that did not belong. It became about maintaining a balance within what was present. The threshold of what was acceptable shifted, adapting to the conditions that could not easily be changed. The longer this continued, the more it became part of the structure of life. It did not feel like a problem that could be solved quickly. It felt like a condition that had to be lived with, and because everyone shared it, it did not stand out as something unusual. In the end, the body and its waste were not fully separated. They remained connected through the environment, through surfaces, and through repeated contact. This connection blurred the boundary between clean and unclean, making it hard to define where one ended and the other began. Waste did not fully leave the space. It stayed close enough to remain part of daily life. This constant proximity blurred the boundary between what should be separate, making cleanliness harder to define. Attention then turns inward to the body itself, where attempts to clean intimate areas relied on methods that often failed, allowing layers of build-up to remain over time without proper removal. Care for intimate areas was not guided by clear knowledge of how the body worked, but by habits passed from one person to another. These habits did not come from testing or understanding. They came from repetition, from what had been done before, and from what seemed to make sense within the limits of what people could observe. The result was a set of practices that felt reliable, even when they were not. There was no consistent method that everyone followed. Instead, there were many small variations, each shaped by local belief and personal experience. Women relied on what they had been told, what they had seen others do, and what appeared to bring some kind of change. These methods did not always aim to clean in the way we would define it today. They aimed to manage discomfort or to adjust what could be noticed. Substances were used because they were available and familiar. Some were chosen for their scent, others for their texture, and others simply because they were believed to have an effect. These materials were applied carefully, often in small amounts, with the expectation that they would improve the condition of the body. The process felt deliberate, even if the results were uncertain. What is striking is that these methods often addressed the surface rather than the cause. They might alter how the body felt for a short time or change how it was perceived, but they did not remove what had built up. In some cases, they added new layers rather than clearing existing ones. The intention was to help, but the effect was
limited.
Because there was no clear understanding of how the body functioned internally, it was difficult to judge whether something was truly working. Improvement was measured by immediate sensation rather than long-term change. If something felt different, it was assumed to be better. If it did not cause immediate harm, it was repeated. Over time, this created a pattern of trial without confirmation. Methods were passed down because they were familiar, not because they were proven. Each generation continued what it had received, adding small adjustments without fully questioning the foundation. The system remained stable, even if it was not effective. The environment played a role in shaping these practices. Limited access to water, combined with existing beliefs about its risks, meant that direct washing was not always used. This left space for alternative methods, to develop methods that avoided immersion, but still aimed to manage the body. From the outside, these efforts might appear as care. They involved attention, time, and intention. A woman did not ignore her body. She acted within the knowledge available to her, doing what she believed was necessary to maintain it. The limitation was not in the effort, but in the understanding behind it. What is unsettling is how some of these methods could make the situation worse without being recognized as such. Adding substances that did not remove buildup could lead to further accumulation. Repeating the same process could reinforce the condition rather than improve it. But because the change was gradual, it was not always noticed. The body adapted again. It responded to what was applied to it, adjusting over time. Sensations that might have seemed unusual at first became part of the normal experience. The line between improvement and persistence became less clear, making it harder to judge the true effect of these practices. If we compare this to today, it would be like relying on methods that feel helpful in the moment, without understanding whether they address the underlying issue. The difference lies in the knowledge available. Without it, even well-intended actions can lead to results that are incomplete or even counterproductive. I find it difficult to ignore how this reflects the broader pattern seen throughout daily life. Direct solutions were often replaced by indirect ones. Removal was replaced by adjustment. The body was managed through layers, through additions, rather than through clearing what had accumulated. The repetition of these methods reinforced their acceptance. When something is done often enough, it begins to feel correct. The absence of clear alternatives made it even harder to question. What existed became the standard, not because it was effective, but because it was available. Over time, the body carried the results of these practices in the same way it carried everything else. Layers built up, interactions between substances and the body continued, and nothing fully reset. The condition to a neutral state, the cycle remained unbroken. This created a quiet tension between intention and outcome. The effort to care for the body was real, but the effect did not always match that effort. Still, the presence of effort made the system feel complete. It provided a sense of control, even if that control was limited. The more this continued, the more it shaped how women understood their bodies. Care became something defined by action, not by result. As long as something was being done, it felt as though the body was being maintained. In the end, these practices did not fully remove what had accumulated. They managed it, altered it, and sometimes added to it. But because they were repeated and accepted, they became part of what it meant to care for the body in that world. Care for the body relied on methods that felt familiar, even when they failed to remove what had built up over time. This reliance on repetition over understanding allowed problems to persist, beneath the surface without being fully addressed. A more unsettling pattern appears next, where certain materials used for cleaning did not remove anything at all, but instead trapped even more within the body itself. Some materials were used with the belief that they could clean the body, yet they often did something else entirely. Instead of removing what had built up, they altered it, softened it, or covered it in a way that made it less noticeable. The intention was to reduce what was present, but the result was often an addition rather than a removal. These substances came from what was readily available. Plant-based mixtures, powdered materials, and simple compounds were applied to the skin with care. They were chosen because they seemed to interact with the body visibly. A change in texture, a shift in scent, or a temporary difference in sensation was enough to suggest that something had been improved. The application itself created a clear moment of action. The material was placed onto the skin, spread carefully, and worked into the surface. This process felt deliberate. It gave the impression that something was being done to address what the body carried. The presence of effort reinforced the belief in its effectiveness. What followed, however, did not always match that belief. These materials did not dissolve or remove the deeper layers that had settled into the skin. Instead, they interacted with them. Oils mixed with powders, moisture blended with plant residues, and what had already been present became part of a more complex layer. This interaction changed the state of what was on the body, but did not eliminate it. What had once been separate became combined. The surface might feel different, smoother in some places, less uneven in others, but the underlying presence remained. It was not gone. It had been transformed. Over time, this created a gradual accumulation that was not always obvious. Each application added something new. Even when part of it was removed later, traces remained. The body carried forward not just what it produced naturally, but also what had been applied to it repeatedly. The effect of this layering was subtle at first. There was no single moment where the change became clear. Instead, it developed slowly as one layer settled over another. The body adjusted to this condition just as it had adapted to everything else. From the outside, the result could appear improved. The surface of the skin might look more even, the scent might shift in a way that felt more manageable. These visible and immediate changes reinforced the belief that the method was working. They confirmed, without requiring deeper examination.
What is saint?
Riking is how this process replaced the need for removal entirely. As long as the surface appeared altered positively, there was no urgency to clear what remained beneath. The transformation of what was present became enough. If we compare this to today, it would be like adding layers to something that needs to be removed, creating the appearance of improvement without addressing the source. The surface changes, but the accumulation continues, becoming more complex over time. I find it difficult to ignore how easily this approach fits into the broader pattern of hygiene. It avoided water. It required minimal resources, and it produced immediate results. These factors made it both practical and convincing, even when it was incomplete. The body adapted once again. It carried these additional layers without clear interruption. Sensation adjusted to the new state, making it harder to distinguish between what was natural and what had been added. The difference blurred over time.
This created
A system where change was constant, but removal was rare. Each new application shifted the condition slightly, but did not reset it. The body moved forward with everything it had gathered, both from itself and from what had been applied to it. The repetition of this process reinforced its acceptance. When something is done regularly, it becomes part of what feels normal. The absence of a clear alternative made it even more difficult to question. What existed became the standard. The distinction between cleaning and altering became less clear. The two were treated as if they were the same. As long as something changed, it was assumed that something had been improved. The deeper state of the body remained outside of that assumption. Over time, the accumulation became part of the experience of the body itself. It was no longer something separate. It was integrated, carried forward without interruption. The idea of a fully cleared surface became distant, almost unnecessary. This created a quiet illusion of control. The presence of action, of applying something to the body, gave the sense that the situation was being managed. Even when the underlying condition remained, the act itself provided reassurance. The more this continued, the more it shaped how women understood care. It was not about removing what had built up. It was about adjusting it, managing it, and making it less noticeable. The body became a surface, to be modified rather than cleared. In the end, these materials did not clean in the way they were believed to. They changed the state of what was already there, layering over it and blending into it. The result was not a return to a neutral condition, but a more complex one that carried everything forward. Materials meant to clean the body often stayed behind, mixing with what they were supposed to remove and creating even more layers over time. This quiet accumulation made the surface appear managed, while the deeper state remained unchanged, a more repetitive cycle appears next, where certain practices were reused, again and again, allowing build-up to return and settle without ever being fully cleared away. The monthly cycle did not bring with it a system of cleaning that reset the body, but a set of practices that managed what could not be avoided. It was a time when the body released something visible, something that could not be ignored or hidden entirely. Yet even in this moment, the approach was not built around removal or renewal, but around containment and repetition. Materials were used to absorb what the body produced. These materials were not meant for single use. They were kept, reused, and returned to the body again and again. Fabric, often simple and familiar, became the primary way to manage the process. It sat close to the skin, taking in what it could hold. The act of reuse created a pattern that extended beyond a single cycle. Once the material had been used, it did not disappear. It was cleaned in ways that were not always complete, then stored, then used again. Each repetition carried traces of what had come before, even if those traces were not immediately visible. Cleaning these materials was not always consistent. Water, when used, did not always reach every part of the fabric. Time and resources were limited, and the process was often shaped by what was possible rather than what was thorough. The result was a partial clearing rather than a full reset. This meant that what had been absorbed was not always fully removed. Residue remained within the fibers, held in place even after washing. When the material was used again, it returned to the body carrying what had not been cleared. The cycle continued, not from a neutral starting point, but from a layered one. The body interacted with these materials in a continuous exchange. What was released was absorbed, then returned in part through reuse. The boundary between what belonged to the current moment and what remained from the past became less distinct. Each cycle built upon the last. From the outside, this process was not always visible. It was managed privately, kept close to the body, and out of direct view. Because of this, it did not draw attention in the same way as other aspects of daily life might. It existed quietly, repeated as needed, without being questioned deeply. What is striking is how this repetition created a sense of normality. The reuse of materials was not seen as unusual. It was practical, familiar, and expected. The absence of a fully clean starting point did not stand out because there was no clear reference for something different. The environment influenced this process as well. Limited access to water combined with existing beliefs about its use shaped how materials were cleaned. Even when efforts were made, they were often constrained by what was available. The result was a system that worked within limits rather than exceeding them. If we compare this to today, it would be like using the same materials repeatedly without ensuring they are fully cleared, allowing each use to carry something forward into the next. The difference lies in the expectation of what clean means and how it is achieved. I find it difficult to overlook how this reflects the broader pattern seen throughout daily life. Direct removal was rare. Instead, management and repetition took their place. The body was not reset. It was carried forward cycle after cycle with small adjustments rather than complete clearing. The materials themselves became part of this pattern. They were not separate from the body. They interacted with it, absorbed from it, and returned to it. Over time, they carried their own history, layered within their fibers, shaping how they functioned in each new use. This created a loop that was difficult to break. Each step depended on the one before it. The absence of a full reset meant that nothing was ever entirely removed. It was only shifted, absorbed, and partially returned. The body adapted once, again. It continued through these cycles without a clear interruption, adjusting to the presence of materials that were not fully clean. Sensation, as before, was adjusted to what was repeated. What might have been noticeable at first became less so over time. This adaptation made the cycle feel stable. It did not create sudden changes or disruptions. It continued quietly, reinforcing itself through repetition. The lack of complete removal did not feel urgent because the system itself felt consistent. Over time, the idea of cleanliness within this process became relative. It was not about achieving a fully cleared state. It was about managing what was present in a way that felt acceptable. The standard was shaped by what was possible, not by what was ideal. The longer this continued, the more it shaped how women understood their bodies during this time. Care became something defined by repetition and familiarity rather than by complete renewal. The process remained the same, even as it carried forward what had not been removed. In the end, the cycle did not provide a clean break. It did not return the body or the materials to a neutral state. Instead, it created a continuous loop where each repetition added to what already existed, allowing layers to build over time without being fully cleared away. Reused materials carried traces from one cycle into the next, turning what should have been temporary into something continuous. This repetition created a build-up that was never fully removed, only managed and carried forward. Conditions inside enclosed living spaces made this even more intense, as limited airflow allowed layers of scent, moisture, and residue to linger and grow heavier over time. Living spaces did not clear what entered them. They held onto it and allowed it to settle. Air moved slowly, if at all, and what was carried into a room remained there, blending into everything else. The environment did not reset itself. It accumulated layer by layer, shaping tea. The experience of being inside it. Homes were often enclosed, built to protect from outside conditions rather than to allow constant circulation. Openings were limited, and when they existed, they did not create a continuous flow of air. What entered the space stayed, mixing with what was already present. Over time, this created an atmosphere that felt dense and stable. Moisture from the body did not disappear after it was released. It lingered in the air, settling into surfaces, fabrics, and materials that surrounded daily life. Walls absorbed it slowly. Floors carried traces of it, and clothing held onto it as it moved between the body and the environment. Nothing was fully removed. It was redistributed. Scent followed the same pattern. What the body produced did not leave the space. It remained, blending with the existing layers that had built up over time. Each day added something new, while previous traces stayed in place. The result was not a single distinct presence, but a mixture. That became familiar through repetition. The body and the environment were not separate in any meaningful way. Each influenced the other continuously. What the body released became part of the room, and what the room held returned to the body through contact and exposure. This exchange did not pause. It continued quietly, shaping both at the same time. From the outside, the structure of the home appeared stable and controlled. Surfaces could be arranged, objects could be placed carefully, and order could be maintained visually. But beneath that order, the environment carried what could not be seen clearly, what did not draw immediate attention. This created a condition where everything felt consistent, even as it became more concentrated. The absence of change made it difficult to notice what was building up. Familiarity reduced awareness. What might have stood out in a different setting became part of the background here. The lack of airflow reinforced this effect. Without movement, to disperse what was present, everything remained close. The air itself became a carrier of accumulated layers, moving slowly through the space without clearing it. Each breath taken within that environment was part of the same system. Over time, this created a sense of enclosure that extended beyond the physical structure. The space felt contained, holding on to everything within it. The boundary between inside and outside was clear in form, but less clear in function. What was inside stayed inside, shaping the experience of daily life. If we compare this to today, it would be like living in a space where nothing is fully aired out, where each day adds to what is already present without ever removing it. The difference would not be immediately obvious. It would develop slowly, becoming noticeable only when compared to something else. I find it difficult to ignore how this environment reinforced every other habit. The avoidance of water, the reliance on fabric, and the use of layered materials all became more significant in a space that held onto everything. Nothing was lost. Everything remained part of the system. The body adapted once again. It adjusted to the conditions of the space, to the constant presence of what had accumulated. Sensation became familiar, and familiarity reduced the need to question. What was always present became less noticeable over time. This adaptation created a feedback loop. The environment influenced the body, and the body influenced the environment. Each contributed to the other, building a shared condition that was stable but not neutral. It was shaped by accumulation rather than removal. The absence of clear boundaries between body and space made it difficult to define where one ended and the other began. The air carried elements of both. Surfaces reflected what had passed through them. The distinction existed in theory, but not always in experience. Over time, this lack of separation became normal. It did not feel unusual to exist. Within a space that held on to everything, it felt consistent, predictable, and manageable. The absence of change made it easier to accept. The longer this continued, the more the environment became an extension of the body. It held what the body released and returned it through constant exposure. The interaction was continuous, shaping how the body was experienced without being directly addressed. This created a quiet intensity, not a sudden change, but a gradual deepening of what was already present. Each layer added to the last, making the environment more saturated over time without ever fully resetting it. The system did not break. It continued steadily, reinforced by every habit and every condition that supported it. The enclosed space became a container for everything that had not been removed, holding it in place and allowing it to build. In the end, the living space did not separate the body from what it carried. It concentrated it. It held on to it, allowing it to remain and return, shaping the experience of daily life in ways that were rarely questioned. Enclosed spaces did not clear what entered them. They intensified it, allowing every layer to remain and build over time. This constant accumulation made the environment feel stable while quietly becoming more saturated. Perception then adapted to this condition, making what was once noticeable fade into something that felt completely normal. Cleanliness did not come from what had been removed from the body, but from what the body had learned to accept over time. The feeling of being clean was not tied to a clear physical state. It was tied to familiarity, to repetition, and to the quiet absence of anything that felt different from the day before. The body adjusted first. Sensations that might have once stood out began to fade into the background as they remained unchanged. The constant presence of moisture, the weight of fabric resting against the skin, and the subtle accumulation that built day after day. Why all became less noticeable? They did not disappear. They simply stopped demanding attention. The mind followed this pattern closely. What remained constant was no longer processed as something important. Instead, it became part of the expected experience. Attention shifted toward change, not stability. If nothing felt new or unusual, there was no reason to question it. This created a quiet shift in how cleanliness was understood. It was no longer defined by the absence of what the body carried. It was defined by the absence of discomfort within a familiar range. If the body did not feel worse than before, it was assumed to be fine. Over time, this redefinition became stable. The idea of what it meant to feel clean adjusted to match the environment. It was not about reaching a neutral state. It was about maintaining a consistent one. As long as the body remained within that consistency, there was no urgency to change anything. The environment reinforced this perception. Enclosed space. Repeated routines, and continuous exposure to the same conditions created a steady sensory experience. There were no sharp contrasts to highlight differences. Without contrast, there was no clear signal that something had changed. From the outside, this appeared completely normal. People moved through their daily lives without visible signs of discomfort. Their appearance remained controlled, their routines consistent. Nothing suggested that their understanding of cleanliness had shifted away from something more direct. What is striking is how complete this adaptation became. It did not feel like a compromise. It felt like the natural state of things. The body and mind aligned with the environment, creating a sense of balance that did not depend on the actual removal of what had accumulated. If we compare this to today, it would be like living in a condition long enough that it no longer feels unusual, even if it would be immediately noticeable to someone experiencing it for the second time. The difference lies not in the condition itself, but in how it is perceived. I find it difficult to ignore how this shift shaped behavior. When something feels normal, it no longer demands attention. The absence of discomfort removes the need for action. What remains constant becomes accepted, even if it would not be considered ideal in another context. The body continued to carry its layers. Sweat, oils, and the results of repeated practices remained in place. But because these changes happened gradually, they did not create a strong response. They became part of the baseline, something that was always there. This created a quiet stability, not a clean state in the modern sense, but a consistent one. The body and mind worked together to maintain that consistency. As long as nothing disrupted it, it felt complete. The concept of cleanliness became relative. It was shaped by the environment and by the people within it. If everyone shared the same condition, that condition became the standard. There was no external reference point to suggest that anything was missing. Over time, this shared perception reinforced itself. Each person's experience confirmed the others. The absence of difference created a collective agreement about what was acceptable. This agreement did not need to be spoken. It existed through repetition and observation. The longer this continued, the more difficult it became to recognize any gap between perception and reality. The original reference point faded, replaced by a new understanding that felt stable and complete. Cleanliness, as an idea, adapted to fit the conditions of daily life. This adaptation made the absence of direct cleaning less noticeable. It removed the sense that something essential had been left undone. The body did not feel incomplete. It felt aligned with its surroundings, part of a system that functioned without interruption. The senses played a key role in this process. What is constant is often ignored. The body left ahs to filter out what does not change, allowing attention to focus on what is new. In this way, even significant conditions can fade into the background if they remain consistent over time. This created a quiet disconnect. The body continued in its accumulated state, while the mind interpreted that state as normal. The two did not need to align perfectly. As long as the experience felt stable, it was accepted. The more this pattern repeated, the stronger it became. Each day reinforced the last. Each unchanged condition confirmed the belief that nothing needed to be altered. The absence of change became its own form of reassurance. In the end, the feeling of being clean did not come from removing what had built up. It came from living within that build-up, long enough that it no longer felt different. Perception replaced reality, and that perception became the standard by which everything was judged. Cleanliness became something defined by habit, not by what had actually been removed from the body. This shift allowed people to feel normal even as layers continued to build beneath the surface. When an entire community shares the same perception, it becomes almost impossible to recognize that anything is wrong at all. The most unsettling part was not the condition itself, but the complete absence of awareness around it. What existed was not hidden deliberately. It was simply not recognized. When an entire community shared the same habits, the same environment, and the same expectations, there was no clear point of comparison. Without contrast, there was no signal that anything was wrong. Everyone lived within the same system. The same air, the same routines, the same methods of managing the body were repeated across households and across generations. What one person experienced was mirrored by others, creating a shared understanding that felt stable and unquestioned. There was no external reference to challenge it. Because of this, the idea of being unclean did not stand out. It was not something that could be easily identified. The body, as it existed within this system, felt normal. It did not trigger a sense of alarm or urgency. It did not feel like something that needed to be corrected. The absence of comparison played a central role in this. Without seeing something different, it is difficult to imagine that a difference exists. The mind relies on contrast to identify change, and when everything remains within the same range, that contrast disappears. What is shared becomes invisible. This invisibility created a powerful form of certainty. People did not question their condition because there was nothing that suggested it should be questioned. Each person's experience confirmed the others. The shared environment reinforced the belief that everything was as it should be. The body in this context was not seen as carrying something that needed to be removed. It was seen as existing within a normal state. That state might have been layered, accumula, and unchanged over long periods, but it did not feel abnormal. It felt consistent. From the outside, this system appeared orderly. People dressed carefully, maintained their appearance, and followed routines that suggested control and care. These visible actions reinforced the belief that cleanliness had been achieved, even if it had not been addressed directly. What is striking is how deeply this agreement shaped perception. It was not a conscious decision made by individuals. It was a collective understanding that developed over time. It did not require discussion or confirmation. It existed quietly, guiding behavior without being noticed. If we compare this to today, it would be like living in a condition where everyone shares the same limitation, making it impossible to see that limitation clearly. The absence of difference removes the ability to recognize what is missing. It creates a sense of completeness that may not reflect reality. I find it difficult to ignore how this collective agreement removed the need for change. When something is accepted by everyone, it becomes resistant to questioning. There is no pressure to adjust, no reason to seek alternatives. The system maintains itself through repetition. The environment supported this agreement at every level. Enclosed spaces, repeated exposure, and consistent habits created a stable experience that did not vary significantly from one person to another. This stability reinforced the belief that everything was normal. Over time, the idea of cleanliness became detached from the physical state of the body. It became a shared perception, something defined by agreement rather than by condition. As long as that agreement held, there was no need to look beyond it. The body continued to exist within this framework, carrying what it had accumulated without interruption. But because this was true for everyone, it did not stand out. It did not create a sense of difference. It simply became part of the baseline. His created a quiet form of blindness, not a lack of intelligence or awareness in general, but a lack of contrast that made certain conditions impossible to see clearly. What was always present became invisible, even if it was significant. The longer this continued, the stronger the effect became. Each generation inherited the same understanding, reinforcing it without needing to question it. The absence of change over time made the system feel complete, even if it was not. The idea that something could be different, that the body could be maintained in another way, remained distant. It was not part of daily experience. Without that experience, it did not become part of thought. It remained outside of what felt possible. This shared perception did more than shape individual behavior. It shaped the entire structure of daily life. It influenced how people interacted, how they judged one another, and how they understood themselves. Cleanliness became something that existed within the group, not within the body alone. The agreement itself became a form of stability. It removed uncertainty by creating a clear, shared standard. Even if that standard was limited, it provided a sense of order. It allowed people to move through their lives without needing to question what they could not see. In the end, the most unsettling part was not what the body carried, but the fact that no one recognized it as a problem. The absence of awareness made the condition complete. It removed the possibility of change because there was nothing to change from within that perspective. The body remained as it was, shaped by everything that had come before, carried forward without interruption. And because everyone shared that same state, it did not feel like something that needed to be altered. No one questioned the condition because everyone shared it, turning a hidden problem into a collective norm that felt completely natural. This shared perception removed any sense of urgency, allowing everything to continue unchanged. A quiet shift begins to emerge beyond this, where small changes in understanding slowly start to challenge what had once seemed unquestionable. And neat appearance became the only proof of cleanliness, replacing any need to consider the condition of the body itself. What could be seen carried more weight than what could not. The surface, carefully arranged and controlled, stood in place of something deeper, shaping how people were judged and how they judged themselves. The act of presenting oneself became central. Clothing was adjusted with attention, layers aligned, and every visible detail brought into order. These actions were not random. They followed expectations that had been repeated and reinforced over time. A composed appearance signaled discipline, care, and control. Even if none of these qualities extended to the body beneath, observation was quick and direct. People did not look beyond what was immediately visible. A smooth garment, a balanced position, and a steady presence were enough to create an impression. That impression was accepted without question. There was no need to verify it, no reason to search for what lay hidden. Because of this, the body itself became secondary. It existed beneath layers that defined perception, shielded from view, and therefore from judgment. The focus remained on what could be arranged and maintained externally. What could not be seen did not enter into consideration. This created a shift in how cleanliness was measured. It was no longer about removing what the body carried. It was about maintaining an image that suggested everything had been taken care of. The image replaced the reality, and over time, the two were treated as if they were the same. Clothing played a decisive role in this transformation. It provided a surface that could be controlled, a visible layer that could be adjusted to meet expectations. Clean fabric, carefully worn, created a sense of renewal. It suggested that something had been refreshed, even if the body inside had not changed. Behavior reinforced this effect. Movement, posture, and the way a person carried themselves contributed to the overall impression. Cleanliness was not only seen in fabric, but in conduct. A composed demeanor added to the sense that everything was in order, extending the illusion beyond physical appearance. What is striking is how complete this system became. It did not require direct evidence. It relied on signals that were easy to recognize and easy to maintain. As long as those signals were present, the underlying condition did not need to be addressed. If we compare this to today, it would be like judging the state of something entirely by its surface, assuming that what lies beneath must match what is visible. The assumption replaces the need for confirmation, creating a simplified understanding that may not reflect reality. I find it difficult to ignore how this reliance on appearance shapes daily life. It reduced complexity. IT, allowing people to make quick judgments without needing to consider deeper factors. It created a system that was efficient, even if it was incomplete. The body adapted to this system. It remained largely unchanged beneath the layers, carrying forward what had accumulated over time. The absence of direct care did not create a visible problem because the visible layer provided enough reassurance. This reassurance became central. It allowed people to feel confident in their condition without needing to examine it closely. The presence of order at the surface replaced the need for actual removal of what lay beneath. Over time, this created a stable pattern. The visible layer was maintained consistently, while the hidden layer remained constant. The two existed side by side, but only one was acknowledged. The other was left outside of attention. The longer this continued, the stronger the illusion became. Each interaction reinforced it. Each observation confirmed it. The absence of contradiction made it feel complete. There was no reason to question what appeared to be working. This system also shaped how people viewed others. Judgments were based on what could be seen quickly and clearly. A neat appearance signaled acceptability, while any visible disorder could draw attention. The body itself, hidden beneath layers, did not play a direct role in these judgments. This created a shared understanding that extended across the community. Everyone participated in the same system, using the same signals and interpreting them in the same way. The agreement did not need to be spoken. It existed through repetition and expectation. Over time, the idea of cleanliness became fully aligned with appearance. It was something that could be displayed, something that could be observed, something that could be observed, something that could be confirmed without deeper examination. The physical state of the body became less relevant. This alignment made the illusion durable. It did not rely on constant effort to maintain. In belief, it sustained itself through visible evidence that seemed sufficient. As long as the surface remained in order, the system held. The body continued to exist within this structure, carrying what it always had. But because it was hidden, it did not disrupt the perception of cleanliness. The separation between appearance and reality remained intact. In the end, a neat appearance did not reflect the condition of the body. It replaced it. It became the standard by which cleanliness was defined, allowing the underlying reality to remain unchanged while still being accepted as complete. Appearance became the final proof of cleanliness, making the unseen condition of the body irrelevant as long as the surface remained controlled. This reliance on what could be observed strengthened an illusion that no longer needed to be questioned. Gradual changes in awareness began to emerge over time, quietly challenging what had long been accepted without anyone realizing it at first. Change did not arrive suddenly, and it did not begin as something clear or decisive. It started in small, almost unnoticeable ways, shaped by quiet shifts in how people thought about the body and the spaces they lived in. These shifts did not immediately replace old beliefs. They existed alongside them, subtle enough to pass without drawing attention. For a long time, the existing system remained stable. Habits were repeated, perceptions stayed consistent, and the idea of cleanliness continued to depend on appearance rather than direct care. There was no immediate reason to question it. Everything felt familiar, and familiarity created a sense of certainty. But over generations, small adjustments began to appear. They did not come as complete changes. They came as slight differences in how certain actions were approached. A little more attention to washing, a small increase in the use of water, or a gradual reconsideration of what it meant to remove something from the body. These changes were dramatic, but they were persistent. At first, they did not seem significant. They existed within the larger system without disrupting it. People might experiment with new methods or adjust existing ones, but these actions were often limited. They did not immediately replace what had been done before. Instead, they added to it. The presence of these small changes created a subtle contrast. For the first time, there were differences that could be noticed, even if only slightly. These differences made it possible to compare, to see that one approach produced a different result than another. The idea of contrast which had been missing before began to return. This contrast did not spread evenly. It appeared in certain places among certain groups and then slowly moved outward. Not everyone adopted new practices at the same time. Some continued, as before, while others began to adjust. The system became less uniform, and that lack of uniformity allowed new ideas to take hold.
What is striking
Is how gradual this process was. It did not replace old habits overnight. It worked against them slowly, breaking them down piece by piece. Each small change created space for another, and over time those changes began to connect. The understanding of the body began to shift as well. Instead of seeing it as something that should remain undisturbed, there was a growing sense that it could be actively maintained. This idea did not fully replace the old one at first. It existed alongside it, creating a tension between what had always been done and what was beginning to change. If we compare this to today, it would be like slowly realizing that something long accepted might not be complete, and then beginning to adjust behavior in small ways before fully understanding why. The change does not happen all at once. It builds through repetition and observation. I find it difficult to ignore how important these small steps were. On their own, they might not have seemed enough to alter anything. But together, they created a direction, a gradual movement, away from what had once felt unquestionable. The environment began to reflect these changes. Spaces were adjusted, habits were reconsidered, and the idea of clearing what had accumulated became more visible. It was not yet consistent, but it was present in ways that had not existed before. The body responded to these adjustments. Even small changes in how it was cared for created differences that could be felt. These differences reinforced the idea that something new was possible, that the body did not have to remain in the same state indefinitely. This created a quiet shift in perception. Cleanliness began to move back towards something more tangible, something connected to actual removal rather than appearance alone. The illusion that had once been enough started to lose its strength, not all at once, but gradually. Over time, these small changes began to challenge the collective agreement that had defined everything before. As more people experienced differences, the shared standard became less stable. What had once been invisible started to become noticeable. The process was slow, but it was consistent. Each generation carried forward what had been learned, adding to it, adjusting it, and refining it. The accumulation that had once defined the body began to be addressed in new ways, even if those ways were not yet fully understood. The longer this continued, the clearer the direction became. The system that had once relied entirely on appearance began to shift towards something more direct. The body itself started to return to the center of attention, no longer hidden entirely beneath layers of fabric and perception. This did not mean that everything changed at once. Old habits remained, and new ones developed slowly. The transition was uneven, shaped by time and by the limits of what people could understand. But the movement was there, steady and persistent. In the end, change did not come from a single. The moment of realization, it came from many small moments repeated over time, each one adding to the next. These moments gradually broke apart what had once seemed fixed, creating space for something different to emerge. Change began as something almost invisible, growing slowly through small adjustments that did not seem important at first. These gradual shifts created the first real contrast against a system that had long gone unquestioned. What follows brings everything together, revealing how these changes reshaped the way cleanliness was understood and why the past feels so different when viewed from the present. Cleanliness is not always what it appears to be. And in many cases, it is shaped more by agreement than by reality. What people accept as clean is often defined by what they are used to seeing, what they are taught to believe, and what fits within the limits of their environment. This means that the idea of being clean can exist without fully reflecting the actual condition. Number of the body. Throughout everything that has come before, a pattern has remained consistent. The body was rarely reset. It was managed, adjusted, covered, and adapted, but not fully cleared. Yet within that system, people still felt normal. They still believed that what they were doing was enough. That belief did not come from ignorance alone. It came from a shared understanding that was reinforced every day. When an entire community shares the same habits, those habits begin to feel correct. They do not need to be questioned because there is no clear alternative to compare them against. The absence of contrast creates a sense of stability, and that stability becomes the foundation for belief. What is considered clean, then, becomes less about the body itself and more about perception. It becomes something that can be seen, something that can be signaled, something that can be agreed upon. The actual state of the body fades into the background, replaced by the idea of what it should look like. This creates a quiet but powerful illusion. A person can appear clean, feel clean, and be accepted as clean, even if nothing has been removed from the body in a meaningful way. The illusion does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be consistent enough to be accepted by others. Looking back, it becomes easier to see this gap between perception and reality. The once invisible accumulation becomes clear when viewed from a different perspective. What felt normal within that world begins to feel unfamiliar when compared to another. If we compare this to today, it raises an important question. How much of what we consider clean is based on actual removal, and how much is based on what we have learned to accept? The answer is not always simple. Even now, perception continues to play a role in how cleanliness is defined. I find it difficult to ignore how easily the human mind adapts to its environment. What is repeated becomes familiar. What is familiar becomes normal. And what is normal becomes accepted, even if it does not reflect an ideal state. The past shows us that the body can exist within a wide range of conditions, and that perception can adjust to match those conditions. It also shows us that change does not happen all at once. It happens slowly through small shifts that build over time. Understanding this does not mean judging the past. It means recognizing how flexible human perception can be. People did not choose to ignore their bodies. They responded to the knowledge and conditions available to them. Their understanding made sense within their world. At the same time, it reminds us that what feels certain now may not always remain that way. The standards we hold today are shaped by our current knowledge, just as past standards were shaped by theirs. What we accept now may one day be seen differently. Cleanliness, then, is not a fixed idea. It is something that evolves, shaped by changes in understanding, environment, and culture. The body remains the same in many ways, but the way we care for it continues to change. This makes the concept more complex than it first appears. It is not just about removing what is present. It is about how we define what should be removed and why. It is about the relationship between what is real and what is perceived. The past reveals how easily that relationship can shift. It shows how a system can feel complete even when it leaves important things unaddressed. It shows how belief can fill the space where understanding is limited. At the same time, it shows how change becomes possible. Small differences once introduced can grow. New ideas once considered can spread. Over time, what once felt unquestionable can begin to shift. The body does not change quickly, but the way we understand it does, and that understanding shapes everything else, from daily habits to the larger systems that support them. In the end, the most important lesson may not be about the past itself, but about the present. It is about recognizing that what feels normal is not always the same as what is real. It is about understanding that perception can both reveal and conceal at the same time. This awareness does not require fear or discomfort. It simply requires attention. It invites a closer look at what we accept without question, and a willingness to consider how those beliefs are formed. As you reach the end of this journey, the details may begin to settle into the background, just as they once did for those who lived through them. The images, the patterns, and the quiet cycles of daily life all become part of a larger understanding. And now, as everything becomes still, you can let that understanding fade gently, without needing to hold on to it too tightly. The story does not need to remain sharp or clear. It can soften just as everything else has. Your mind can begin to slow, moving away from the details and into a calmer space. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing left to question. In this moment, past has been seen and it can now rest where it belongs. Let the ideas drift one by one, becoming lighter as they move further away. The sense of contrast, of difference, of discovery can begin to quiet down. What remains is a simple awareness, steady and calm. Your breathing can become slower, more even as your body settles into stillness. There is no need to hold on to any tension, no need to follow any thought to its end. Everything can remain unfinished, gently fading. The world around you becomes softer, less defined as your attention turns inward. The details of the day, like the details of the past, can begin to dissolve into something quieter and more distant. You have reached the end, and there is nothing more you need to do. Good night. Sleep well.